Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. President Joe Biden posting on X, I just imposed a series of tariffs on goods made in China. 25% on steel and aluminum, 50% on semiconductors, 100% on EVs, and 50% on solar panels. China is determined to dominate these industries. I'm determined to ensure America leads the world in them. The president also made some remarks in the White House Rose Garden. That's coming up in a moment. The Donald Trump presidential campaign called the tariff increases too little, too late. And Donald Trump himself talked about this at his hush money trial in New York City. House Speaker Mike Johnson becomes the highest-ranking Republican to attend that trial, saying this ridiculous prosecution is not about justice. He said it's all about politics. U.S. House expected to join the Senate in passing a 5-year, $100 billion Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill, sending it to the president to be signed into law. Secretary of State Antony Blinken makes a previously unannounced trip to Ukraine, acknowledging the months-long delay in Congress passing a new military aid package has caused challenges, with Russia making recent advances on the ground, but pledging the U.S. will be at Ukraine's side until its security and sovereignty is guaranteed. As part of National Police Week, the U.S. House debates a resolution supporting local law enforcement officers and condemning efforts to defund local agencies. And Attorney General Merrick Garland speaks at the 70th anniversary of the landmark Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision ceremony at the Justice Department in Washington, that decision ruling segregated public schools unconstitutional. Story from Yahoo Finance. The White House formally unveiled a sweeping array of new tariffs on Chinese goods Tuesday that will raise duties on $18 billion in Chinese imports. The long-awaited announcement will touch an array of sectors, with steel, semiconductors, to medical products fueling new duties as soon as this year. Electric vehicles are a key focus of the announcement, with duties there set to quadruple in 2024 from 25% to 100%. The actions also notably do not include the lowering of more than $300 billion in Trump-era duties on China. Biden largely re-upped for President Donald Trump's policy and added new tariffs on certain sectors on top. That was from Yahoo Finance. President Biden spoke today in the White House Rose Garden.
25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum products, and we'll counter China's overcapacity in these industries. And we're making major investments in clean American steel and aluminum. Clean American steel and aluminum. It's a big deal. Clean because of the way we manufacture it here. It emits half as much carbon as steel made in China. Last month, my administration announced the largest investment in clean manufacturing in all of history, up to $1.5 billion in 6 clean steel projects across America, creating and supporting thousands of union jobs. Next, a 100% tariff on electric vehicles made in China. People say, wow. Because we're not going to let China flood our market, making it impossible for American auto manufacturers to compete fairly. We're also implementing a 25% tariff on electric vehicle batteries from China and a 25% tariff on critical minerals that make those batteries. Folks, look, I'm determined that the future of electric vehicles will be made in America by union workers, period. And we'll do it by following international trade laws to do it. American companies are investing tens of billions of dollars in electric vehicles and batteries. And thanks to my bipartisan infrastructure law, we're building a network of 500,000 charging stations all across America, creating thousands of IBEW jobs across America. Electric charging stations. The reason to do this is simple. Electric charging stations have to be as easy to find as a gas station, and that's what this will be. You're not going to have to worry about it taking off, and you're not going to be able to make it all across the country in one without having to figure something else out. Our partners around the world are making similar investments. They also want supply chain for electric vehicles that isn't dominated by unfair trade practices from China. America can continue to buy, Americans, I want to make this clear, notwithstanding what the other guy's saying, can buy any kind of car they want, whether it's gas, electric, or hybrid. But we're never going to allow China to unfairly control the market for these cars, period. Next, we're going to raise tariffs on Chinese solar panels from 25 to 50%. Here again, because the Chinese government is subsidizing excess capacity, they're flooding the market. They're driving manufacturing companies out of business in Europe. But we won't let that happen here in America. We're putting a 50% tariff on semiconductors made in China. These are those tiny computer, all of you know this, but for the public, those little tiny computer chips, smaller than the fingertip, that power everyday lives. Everything from smartphones to automobiles to dishwashers, satellites. Look, America invented these chips, but over time we stopped making them. We invested overseas. Now, thanks to my CHIPS and Science Act, one of the most significant investments ever in science and technology, we're bringing this vital industry back home where it started, in the United States of America. And finally, we're putting tariffs on health equipment like masks and gloves that nurses and doctors wear every single day. The pandemic taught us anything. We need to have a secure supply of essential supplies here at home. Folks, these key sectors, my administration is combining investments in America with tariffs that are strategic and targeted. It's a smart approach. Compare that to what the prior administration did. My predecessor promised to increase American exports and boost manufacturing, but he did neither. He failed. He signed a trade deal with China. They were supposed to buy $200 billion more in American goods. Instead, China imports from America barely budged. And now Trump and the MAGA Republicans want across-the-board tariffs on all imports from all countries if reelected. Well, that would drive up costs for families on an average of $1,500 per year each year. It simply doesn't get it.
President Biden in the White House Rose Garden. After he signed the tariff increases, a reporter shouted out a question about what former President Trump said today.
Mr. President, Trump said today China is eating our lunch. What do you say in response? He said China is eating our lunch. That's what Trump said today.
We've been feeding it a long time.
President Biden at the White House. Associated Press writes the tariffs come in the middle of a heated campaign between President Joe Biden and his Republican predecessor Donald Trump, in which both candidates are vying to show who's tougher on China. The Chinese government was quick to push back, issuing a statement Tuesday that the tariffs, quote, will seriously affect the atmosphere of bilateral cooperation. The Foreign Ministry used the word bullying. The tariffs are unlikely, writes AP, to have much of an inflationary impact because of how they're structured. Administration officials said they think the tariffs won't escalate tensions with China, yet they expect China will explore ways to respond to the new taxes on its products. It's uncertain what the long-term impact on prices could be if the tariffs contribute to a wider trade dispute. That was from Associated Press. Former President Donald Trump spoke about President Biden's announcement on China and tariffs as Donald Trump was entering the courtroom in New York City for his hush money trial.
I just want to start by saying that on the electric vehicles that Biden is pushing down everybody's throat, even though people don't want them, he wants to put a big tariff on China, which is a suggestion that I said, where have you been for 3.5 years? They should have done it a long time ago. But they've also got to do it on other vehicles, and they have to do it on a lot of other products, because China's eating our lunch right now. And they went away from what I was doing. They're eating our lunch, so they have to do it on much more than electric vehicles, and they have to get going fast, but it should have been done 3.5 years ago. I did it, I started, and then they started playing games, and it was very bad for the auto industry. In Michigan, the auto industry is doing very poorly because jobs are starting to leave. We're losing, with the electric vehicle mandate, they're going to be made in China. They're all going to be made in China and also in Mexico, owned by China. Poll just came out, the very respected Redfield Wilton, and it has us up 6 in Michigan, 7 in North Carolina, Pennsylvania +2, Georgia +5, Florida +9, Arizona +2, and up in every other place 2. So that just came out. That's on top of yesterday's New York Times poll.
Former President Donald Trump, 2024 Republican presidential candidate in New York City, outside the courtroom where the hush money criminal trial is taking place. KLKN-TV in Lincoln, Nebraska reports Nebraska is charging ahead with lawsuits against California and the Environmental Protection Agency. The Attorney General Mike Hilgers said if the electric vehicle trucking mandates aren't stopped, Nebraskans will pay the price. California's regulations require trucking companies doing business in their state to get rid of diesel trucks and switch over to zero-emission vehicles by 2035. He said this rule will be far too costly for consumers. Nebraska is leading several states in the lawsuits, with 23 others joining in the EPA suit and 16 others supporting the effort against California. That was from KLKN-TV in Lincoln. More about the new tariffs on certain Chinese products. The U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai was at today's White House news conference.
When Trump hiked tariffs on Chinese goods, it led to some increased prices for U.S. customers. How can you be sure the same thing won't happen again?
First of all, I think that link in terms of tariffs to prices has been largely debunked. What I would say is that what the president has instructed that we do is to focus on making our supply chains more resilient. That means we need more options. That means here in America, we need to have more manufacturing capacity. Resilient supply chains means that we will be able to insulate the American economy from the kinds of price spikes and the inflationary dynamics that we have seen that have come primarily from the supply chain challenges we've experienced, first from the pandemic, next from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. If you think back to March of 2020 and you think about how much a face mask cost, it's a trick question. The answer is you did not have enough money to buy a face mask because there just weren't enough in the world to go around. So it is with that in mind that these actions are being taken. It is, in fact, to address those types of challenges that no one wants to experience again.
The U.S. government is subsidizing the EV industry here pretty significantly. How is that different from what the Chinese government is doing?
So if you take a look at the Chinese economic model, what you see is a system of state support that is built to dominate and take over entire industries. So this is what I mean by we've seen the pattern. Steel and aluminum, solar panels, batteries, EVs. Today, China's production capacity in steel is 55% of world capacity. That's in one country. Aluminum, 60%. EVs, 60%. Solar, 80%. And in certain critical minerals, 85 to 95%. So those are subsidies with an aim to cornering the world market and achieving dominance and creating dependency. The types of support that we're talking about here are defensive in nature. They're about creating the space to compete, the space to thrive, the space to survive, the kind of onslaught that we are seeing across the board.
United States Trade Representative Katherine Tai in the White House briefing room with reporters. One opponent to the new tariffs, Governor Jared Polis, Democrat from Colorado, who posted on X, "This is horrible news for American consumers and a major setback for clean energy. Tariffs are a direct regressive tax on Americans, and this tax increase will hit every family." The Economist writing an article that reads, just over 6 years ago, when Donald Trump first announced tariffs on Chinese goods, it was as if a bomb had gone off. American stocks fell sharply at the prospect of a trade war. Businesses warned of blowback, and economists lined up to decry the move. Such is the protectionist mood in Washington now, that Joe Biden's announcement of new measures has been met with rather less panic, even though it concerns significantly higher tariffs. That was from The Economist. And on Wall Street today, the Dow up 126, and NASDAQ up 122, S&P up 25 points. From roll call, the House is expected to easily clear the bicameral Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill, sending the measure to the president's desk with time to spare before a Friday funding deadline. Legislation is scheduled to be considered in the House Tuesday under suspension of the rules. The measure would reauthorize the FAA at $105 billion over 5 years and includes priorities aimed at overhauling aircraft certification and improving aviation safety. The bill passed the Senate the evening of May 9th in an 88-4 vote after a fraught amendment process, as some senators threatened but failed to hold up an agreement to fast-track the bill unless they receive floor votes on their amendments. Senate also cleared a short-term extension of existing authority. President Biden signed the extension the next day, moving the deadline from May 10th to Friday. That was from a roll call. Some of the House floor debate on the FAA bill. The chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is Sam Graves, Republican from Missouri.
This bill is a bipartisan, bicameral, and comprehensive agreement to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration, our nation's aviation safety and infrastructure programs through fiscal year 2028. I want to thank Transportation Infrastructure Committee Ranking Member Rick Larsen, Senate Committee Science and Transportation Chair Maria Cantwell, and Ranking Member Ted Cruz for their partnership in crafting a strong final agreement. And I would also like to thank the House Aviation Subcommittee Chairman Garrett Graves, Ranking Member Steve Cohen, Senate Aviation Subcommittee Chair Tammy Duckworth, and Ranking Member Jerry Moran for their support in getting this bill across the finish line. For over a century, the United States has led the world in aviation safety and innovation. Unfortunately, our gold standard status is being threatened by increased global competition, rapid developments in technology, a shortage of aviation professionals, and influences at the FAA due to process failures and inadequate practices. H.R. 3935 is critical to ensuring America remains the global leader in aviation, and it's vital to our economy, to millions of American jobs, and to the millions of passengers that depend on our national aviation system, airspace system, every single day. H.R. 3935 also provides the long-term certainty necessary to ensure the safety and prosperity of American aviation industry for decades to come.
Congressman Sam Graves, Republican from Missouri, chair of the Infrastructure and Transportation Committee on the House floor during the FAA reauthorization bill debate. He mentioned Rick Larsen, that's the ranking Democrat on the committee from Washington State, who also gave remarks.
I'm proud to support this 5-year reauthorization to ensure that American aviation continues to be a powerful economic engine that creates good-paying jobs and supports local communities across the country. Before I get into the details, I want to provide the FAA bill by the numbers. $4 billion. That is how much we boost the annual airport improvement program funding to, an increase of $650 million a year, with at least $150 million in AIP discretionary funds for airport noise and environmentally sustainable projects. $60 million. The new robust annual funding for workforce development grants to grow the next generation of aviation manufacturer workers, aviation maintenance technicians, and pilots, including a $12 million set aside annually for the new Willow Brown Aviation Education Program to support outreach and educational opportunities to underrepresented communities. $0. That is how much it will cost families now to sit with their young children on commercial aircraft. $200 million for new annual grants to increase airport runway safety and resiliency. $350 million to establish a groundbreaking reimbursement program for airports to replace harmful PFAS firefighting foam and equipment with safer alternatives. And finally, $20 million per year to launch a new pilot program to fund capital projects that improve airport accessibility, among other key reforms. The U.S. aviation system is the safest in the world, but it has been tested in recent years. To rise that challenge, this bill helps prevent runway incursions by expanding ground surveillance and detection technology at major airports to better alert air traffic controllers and the pilots of potential danger. Similarly, to combat fatigue and stress on the air traffic controller workforce caused by understaffing, this bill requires the FAA to hire the maximum number of controllers and to adopt the most appropriate controller staffing model to meet the aviation system's evolving needs. And at a time of unprecedented aerospace innovation, this final bill provides a clear and predictable framework for new airspace entrants to scale safely in our skies.
Congressman Rick Larsen, Democrat from Washington State, ranking member on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on the House floor during the debate on the 5-year FAA reauthorization bill. The bill passed the Senate last week 88-4. The 4 no votes were the 2 senators from Virginia and the 2 senators from Maryland, all Democrats, and they were opposed to a provision in the bill that would add 5 more round-trip slots, 10 flights, at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. And during debate on the House floor today, Congressman Don Beyer, Democrat from Northern Virginia, spoke about it.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in firm opposition to H.R. 3935. I'm deeply concerned about the provisions that would aggravate dangerous conditions at National Airport. Section 502 would add new flights at National already dramatically over capacity. Last month, there was a near miss where two airplanes almost collided at DCA on the busiest runway in America. Today, over a fifth of all flights at DCA are delayed, an average for over an hour. We've heard from Secretary Buttigieg, the FAA, and the Airport Authority. They have serious concerns about safety and increased delays if more flights are added. Importantly, the House has already spoken and rejected this. I'm grateful for the leadership of Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson, but we should not accept a backroom deal between senators to reflect special interests. The Senate refused to consider floor amendments that would restore the House language because those who crafted this bill knew they would lose that vote. It's painful that this measure is still in the bill despite widespread bipartisan opposition. I cannot support a bill that hurts my constituents, that disrespects all the elected leaders from Virginia, Maryland, and D.C., and directly harms our airport and the passengers who use it. I yield back.
Congressman Don Beyer, Democrat from Virginia, on the House floor, and the rules for debate that the FAA reauthorization bill is being brought up under are called suspension of the rules, 40 minutes of debate instead of an hour, no amendments allowed, but it does take a two-thirds vote to pass. From Associated Press, U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson assailed the U.S. judicial system on Tuesday, becoming the highest-ranking Republican to attend court with Donald Trump and using his powerful position to attack the case against the former president as an illegitimate sham. It was a remarkable moment in modern American politics, the House Speaker turning his Republican Party against the federal and state legal systems that are foundational to the U.S. government and a cornerstone of democracy. Johnson, who is second in line for the presidency, called the court system corrupt. Donald Trump is accused of having arranged secret payments to a porn actress to hide negative stories during his successful 2016 campaign for president. That was part of the reporting from Associated Press. Speaker Johnson spoke in a park near the building in New York City where the trial is taking place.
What we've got here is a partisan Democrat district attorney. We have a Biden donor judge, and we have an assistant DA who was recently a top official at the Department of Justice, Biden's DOJ, and recently received over $10,000 in payments from the Democratic National Committee. The star witness here is Michael Cohen. I just listened to a few moments of his testimony this morning, and it is consistent with what he's already done. This is a man who is clearly on a mission for personal revenge and who is widely known as a witness who has trouble with the truth. He is someone who has a history of perjury and is well known for it. No one should believe a word he says today. He lied to Congress, he lied to the IRS, he lied to federal election officials. Even Cohen's own lawyer testified to a grand jury that he is not reliable. So there's nothing that he presents here that should be given any weight at all by a jury, and certainly not this judge. The crime that they are accusing President Trump of is falsification of business records. But I think everybody knows he is not the bookkeeper for his company. President Trump is innocent of these charges. And again, anyone with common sense can understand what is happening here. In the midst of all this nonsense and corruption, they have placed a ridiculous and unprecedented gag order on President Trump. They were overriding his constitutional right to defend himself from political smears from his harshest critics at the most important time. He is soon to be officially the nominee of one of the major parties in our country, running for president. And they have him tied up here in this ridiculous prosecution that is not about justice. It's all about politics, and everybody can see that.
U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, in New York City, outside the building where that trial is taking place. Also spotted today at the Donald Trump trial, Republican House members Byron Donalds and Corey Mills, both of Florida, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum and Vivek Ramaswamy. Both of those two are former Republican presidential candidates. On Monday, U.S. Senators J.D. Vance of Ohio and Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, both Republican, attended the trial. Former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming, who was vice chair of the House Select Committee that investigated the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, posting on X today, Have to admit I'm surprised that Speaker Johnson wants to be in the I cheated on my wife with a porn star club. I guess he's not that concerned with teaching morality to our young people after all. Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York, was interviewed this morning on MSNBC about the hush money trial, and the witness, Michael Cohen, who testified that Donald Trump knew he was reimbursing him $130,000 for the hush money payments, and that the invoices for legal services that were created to cover that were false.
They were very smart to put him so late in the trial, because what is happening now is, as he's on direct examination, he's testifying, and the jury is seeing how what he is saying is consistent with what David Pecker said, with what Stormy Daniels said, with what other witnesses said, because the DA knows that they are going to have to corroborate him, because he is an admitted perjurer, he is an admitted liar, he has testified inconsistently on the stand, so he's either lying one time or the other, and he will be really skewered on cross-examination for that. So in order to use him effectively, they are going to rely heavily on that recording, where he's very much corroborated about what he says about Karen McDougal, and they're going to rely very much on the consistent statements that he made with all of the other witnesses. It remains to be seen today on cross-examination whether he can hold up and accept responsibility for lying on the stand before or lying to Congress. And he will say, of course, yes, I lied, and I did that for Donald Trump, your client, and that'll be effective. The technical defenses or the technical aspects of the case do remain to be seen, but I think the critical thing here that they are really showing over and over and over, both for this trial and just generally, is that Donald Trump just doesn't care about election law. He does not care about campaign finance law. He welcomed Russian interference in 2016. He tried to hide the Stormy Daniels stuff because it came right, especially on the heels of the Access Hollywood, and he thought he was done. Everyone thought he was done. And so they're doing a very effective job of showing that this man just simply doesn't care about the law.
Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York, on MSNBC this morning. One moment from Michael Cohen's testimony today, as reported by CNN. Michael Cohen is now being asked if he regrets his past association with Trump. I regret doing things for him that I should not have, lying, bullying people in order to effectuate a goal. I don't regret working with the Trump organization, Cohen said. As I expressed before, some very interesting, great times, but to keep the loyalty and to do the things that he had asked me to do, I violated my moral compass and I suffered the penalty, as has my family, Cohen adds. That through CNN. Also, a New York appeals court today has affirmed the gag order against former President Trump in this case. It prohibits him from publicly commenting on witnesses, prosecutors, court staff, or the judge's family. The appeals court decision reads, Justice Merchan properly determined that petitioner's public statements posed a significant threat to the integrity of the testimony of witnesses and potential witnesses in this case. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Kayla from C-SPAN. Imagine 45 years ago when there was just a handful of television networks. C-SPAN first went on the air bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Greta from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of our 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, and that's free. Reuters reporting from Kyiv, Ukraine. The U.S. will stand by Ukraine until its security sovereignty is guaranteed, Secretary of State Antony Blinken pledged on Tuesday in a visit to Kyiv at a time when Russia is mounting fresh attacks in the country's east. The top U.S. diplomat is the first senior U.S. official to travel to Ukraine after U.S. Congress passed last month a $61 billion military aid package following a delay of several months during which Russia gained advantage on the battlefield. In a policy speech at Igor Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnic Institute, Blinken acknowledged the delay of U.S. weapons made Ukraine more vulnerable to Russia's attacks, but said Kyiv can count on Washington's unwavering support because the American people understood that Russia will not stop in Ukraine. That was from Reuters. Here's part of Secretary Blinken's speech.
Our joint task is to secure Ukraine's sustained and permanent strategic advantage so that Ukraine can not only deliver on the battlefield today, but deter and defend against future attacks. As President Biden said, we want Ukraine to win, and we're committed to helping you do it. In the immediate term, the United States and dozens of other countries will get Ukraine the assistance that you need, and will get it to you quickly. We're going to help you hold off Russia's attacks, make it harder for them to strike you, and keep the Black Sea open so you can keep growing your economy and keep helping to feed the world. We know that time is of the essence. That's why, just 1 minute after Congress approved our massive aid package, President Biden sent ammunition, armored vehicles, missiles, and air defenses to Ukraine. Much more will be delivered to the battlefield in the coming days. Other partners are also speeding up delivery of vital military assistance. Poland continues to facilitate the transfer of nearly all of the aid that's flowing into Ukraine, including hefty contributions of its own. The Czech government is leading a Europe-wide effort to purchase 500,000 artillery shells. The UK recently announced a robust, multi-year military aid package. Australia committed new support for air defense. A truly global coalition is behind you, made up of countries that see your security, and in turn, European security, as a core security interest of their own. Countries determined to defend the principles at the heart of the United Nations Charter: sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence. Countries that know that allowing Putin to redraw borders by force will embolden would-be aggressors everywhere.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnic Institute in Ukraine. Part of a surprise visit there that included a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Secretary Blinken also made a stop at a bar in Kyiv to play guitar and sing with the local band. He told them, your soldiers, your citizens, particularly in the northeast in Kharkiv, are suffering tremendously, but they need to know, you need to know, the United States is with you. So much of the world is with you, and they're fighting not just for a free Ukraine, but for a free world. And the song that he sang with the band was Rockin' in the Free World by Neil Young. Story from the Washington Post about the country of Georgia. Georgia's parliament approved a controversial foreign agent law Tuesday, defying mass street protests by Georgians who fear that the bill will strip back civil rights and push their country further into Moscow's orbit. The law could also undermine Georgia's bid to join the European Union. That was from the Washington Post. They said the vote in the parliament was 84-30. The U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel asked about it at his news conference in Washington.
I know there have been lots of statements over recent days about what's happening there, but the Parliament has actually pushed through the foreign influence law despite the mass protests and the warnings from the U.S. and the EU. Do you have any comment on that and how this would affect the relationship with the United States?
So we are aware of the status of this legislation. We're continuing to watch closely about further developments in Georgia. Assistant Secretary Jim O'Brien is in Tbilisi. He's spent the day meeting with Georgian officials, and I imagine he'll have more to say after the conclusion of his engagements. But you heard me talk a little bit about this yesterday. More than 80% of the Georgian people want EU membership. We support that aspiration. We also know that the Georgian government has said it wants to join the EU and have a relationship with transatlantic organizations such as NATO. This is something that is consistent with Georgia's own constitution. But things like this legislation, they are inconsistent with that stated goal. So we value our relationship, that in partnership we have with Georgia, one that has existed for more than 30 years, and we would like to continue to deepen that collaboration. And there is still time to work collaboratively, but it's our point of view that the Georgian government needs to change course from the one that it's on. But again, I imagine Assistant Secretary O'Brien and others will have more to talk about their engagements.
Just to clarify, that needs to change course. That means on this law specifically and more broadly as well.
Right. So we have been clear that as it relates to this legislation, it is indicative of the kinds of things that we see in the Kremlin and elsewhere, legislation that targets civil society, legislation that targets media organizations, legislation that targets nonprofits. All of these things are not just inconsistent with the values that we have with the United States, but they're also inconsistent with the aspirations of the Georgian people.
The State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel at his news conference in Washington. From Associated Press, in the coming days, the U.S. military in the eastern Mediterranean is expected to jab one end of a hulking metal dock the length of 4 U.S. football fields into a beach in northern Gaza. And that may be the end of the easy part for the Biden administration's 2-month-long, $320 million effort to open a sea route to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, with dangers and uncertainties ahead for aid delivery teams as fighting surges and the plight of starving Palestinians grows more dire. That from AP. The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder gave more detail on this at his news conference.
In the coming days, the United States, as part of an international effort in coordination with the United Nations and the World Food Program, will begin facilitating the delivery of humanitarian assistance to Gaza via the Cyprus Maritime Corridor. The U.S. government and other international donors are providing aid commodities for delivery from Cyprus to the beach in Gaza by way of U.S. and partner nation military and civilian vessels and a temporary floating pier. The World Food Program will take receipt of that aid once ashore in Gaza and coordinate its onward movement and distribution to people in need. To be clear, this humanitarian effort is intended to relieve the suffering of the people of Gaza. We call on all parties not to interfere with the delivery of life-saving assistance. And finally, on an administrative note, Secretary Austin will go to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center later today for a scheduled routine follow-up appointment with his doctors. The Secretary is in good health, and as we've highlighted previously, you can expect he'll be conducting these types of follow-on checkups from time to time. And with that, we'll take your questions. We'll go to Associated Press, Lita Baldor.
Thanks, Pat. On the aid distribution, is the U.S. satisfied at this point, since this is going to start in the coming days, is the U.S. satisfied with security on the ground? Humanitarian aid groups are still voicing some concerns about their safety on the ground. What does the U.S. think at this moment of the Israeli security on the ground? And are you aware of any lingering concerns about safety for the aid groups?
Yeah, sure. So, as you know, U.S. Central Command has been working very closely with USAID, Israelis, other partners in the region on putting together a comprehensive security plan for this temporary pier and the aid distribution routes. And so a lot of work has gone into that. And of course, as we've said all along, force protection is going to continue to be of paramount concern. All that to say, we do believe that we have the pieces and parts in place so that when we do begin operations, we're confident that we'll have the security in place that we need. For any operation, any commander at any time can make the decision based on the situation on the ground to take appropriate measures to safeguard forces or to safeguard the operation. And so certainly as this operation continues, that will, of course, be something that we're constantly looking at to make sure that at the end of the day, aid can be distributed safely and securely.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, an Air Force Major General, at his news conference at the Pentagon. AP in Cambridge, Massachusetts writes that protesters against the war between Israel and Hamas were voluntarily taking down their tents in Harvard Yard on Tuesday after university officials agreed to discuss their questions about the endowment, bringing a peaceful end to the kinds of demonstrations that were broken up by police on other campuses. And from NBC News, a senior White House official met with a small group of students and faculty at Morehouse College on Friday amid some objections on campus to having President Joe Biden deliver the commencement address there this weekend, according to a White House official and a Morehouse administration official. Reporters asking the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about that meeting.
A senior White House official recently met with some students and faculty at Morehouse College. Can you talk a little bit about some of the concerns raised from those students and faculty members and how the White House responded?
So what I can say is, and you're speaking about Steve Benjamin,
Exactly.
right, Mayor Benjamin, who is also the director of the Office of Public Engagement. I can confirm that he did have a meeting at Morehouse. I won't get into the specifics, but he regularly does this. He regularly goes on the road, hears directly from Americans, and directly in this instance would be students and faculty, obviously, and just don't have anything beyond that to share. The president is certainly looking forward to his commencement address this coming Sunday at Morehouse. He's looking forward to speaking not just to the students, but obviously families and loved ones who are here, who will be there to hear, to celebrate the students, but also to hear a message from this president. Don't have anything more to share, but I can certainly confirm that Steve Benjamin was at Morehouse recently.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her news conference in the White House. The NBC News article has this. During the meeting with Steve Benjamin, some of the students expressed concerns about President Biden overshadowing their graduation. The White House official said. The official added that some students were worried in particular about the controversy surrounding Biden's policy toward Israel and his handling of the war in the Gaza Strip taking center stage at Sunday's ceremony. They also told Benjamin they do not want to hear a campaign speech, the White House official said. Benjamin, in turn, tried to assure the students that Biden's appearance at their graduation would focus on celebrating their accomplishments and his hopes for their futures. That from NBC News, quoting an unnamed White House official. This is National Police Week, and PoliceOne.com has an article. Last night, the National Mall was bathed in the glow of thousands of candles as the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund hosted its 36th annual Candlelight Vigil. This poignant event honored the memories of 282 officers whose names were newly engraved on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Wall, raising the total to 24,067 fallen officers. That reporting from PoliceOne.com. On the U.S. House floor, there's debate on a resolution that, quote, expresses support for local law enforcement officers and condemns efforts to defund local law enforcement agencies. Congressman Mike Ezell, Republican from Mississippi, a former county sheriff, is the sponsor.
Madam Speaker, there is no better time for us to pass this resolution and make it clear we stand with law enforcement this week. While thousands of local law enforcement officers and their families are gathering in our nation's capital, my resolution does just that. It expresses our gratitude for the selfless service of local law enforcement and the importance of a healthy relationship between law enforcement and the communities they protect. It also condemns attempts to undermine that relationship through rhetoric about defunding and abolishing the police. These narratives demonize local law enforcement officers and encourage hostility towards law enforcement. Ultimately, they put both officers and the general public at risk. We've seen targeted ambush-style attacks on law enforcement officers, including one as recently as Sunday. Agencies across the country are struggling to hire and to keep talented officers as they vilified for deciding to serve their communities. At the same time, we're seeing disturbing increases in crime, especially in cities like Washington, D.C., and America's fear of crime is at its highest level in 30 years. Madam Speaker, it's time for this body to lead. It's time for us to make it abundantly clear that we stand with our law enforcement against lawlessness. It's time for a strong bipartisan majority to say once and for all that we will not defund, disband, dismantle, or abolish the police.
Congressman Mike Ezell, Republican from Mississippi, on the House floor, sponsor of this non-binding resolution. Congressman Glenn Ivey, Democrat from Maryland, a former prosecutor, spoke in opposition.
Traditionally, National Police Week has been recognized as a solemn, unifying occasion, a time when members can come together in a bipartisan fashion to recognize and honor the men and women of law enforcement who put their lives on the line every day to protect our communities. However, instead of respecting the dignity of this week, some of my colleagues have decided to move forward with, frankly, political rhetoric and this resolution to satisfy partisan purposes. This resolution amounts to a slap in the face of many federal law enforcement officers who serve and protect us as well. Among this resolution's flaws is that it completely ignores federal law enforcement officers who fight crime, working infrequently with the local law enforcement officers who we're discussing here today. Many of them enforce our laws against human trafficking, drug trafficking, including the rapid rise in fentanyl, the massive flow of firearms, including ghost guns, that illegally enter our country and communities and endanger all of us. So to offer a resolution that fails to honor federal law enforcement officers as well is just plain wrong. I made this objection in the committee when we were having a hearing on a related bill a few weeks ago. So this shouldn't come as a surprise to my colleagues. But in recent years, Republicans have consistently blamed the rise in violent crime on Democrats and attempted to pen the, quote, defund the police rhetoric on Democrats, labeling Democrats as the party to defund the police. Yet, one colleague of ours, a Republican colleague, introduced H.R. 374, the Abolish the ATF Act, a one-line bill that would do away with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He also threatened to, quote, defund, get rid of, or abolish other federal agencies, including the FBI, ATF, and DOJ, quote, if they do not come to heel. Another one of my Republican colleagues called for defunding the FBI as well, and we have multiple Republican colleagues who've made similar kinds of calls to defund federal law enforcement, even though I think all of us recognize how critical they are to protecting the United States and handling matters in conjunction with local law enforcement authorities, or in some instances where local law enforcement authorities don't have the jurisdiction or the authority to handle the matter.
Congressman Glenn Ivey, Democrat from Maryland, on the House floor. Friday is the 70th anniversary of the Supreme Court's unanimous decision in Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, 1954, that ruled that state-sanctioned segregation of public schools was unconstitutional. It violated the 14th Amendment. Today, the Justice Department held a commemoration inviting and thanking some of the African-American students who integrated schools in the face of threats, and the marshals and others who helped protect them in the years that followed the decision. Attorney General Merrick Garland spoke today and talked about the work that's still going on.
The work of Brown is not just part of our history. It is ongoing. It is urgent. This work is urgent for the nearly 900,000 students in 1,500 schools across more than 130 school districts, where the Civil Rights Division is to this day monitoring the implementation of desegregation orders. This work is urgent in Madison County, Alabama, where the Justice Department, joined by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, recently secured a new consent order in a long-standing desegregation case. The order addressed findings that black students in the district faced unnecessary barriers to participating in gifted and advanced programs, that they were subjected to racially disparate discipline, and that the district's recruitment and hiring process left several schools without a single black faculty member. And this work is urgent in school districts around the country, from Kentucky to Utah to Vermont, where the department has entered multiple agreements to address the failures of school districts to appropriately respond to serious incidents of student-on-student race-based harassment. Those agreements have required districts to reform their policies and practices, train their personnel, and take other critical steps to ensure their schools are safe and welcoming educational environments for all students. These are just a few examples of the Justice Department's work in recent years, but we know that more needs to be done.
Attorney General Merrick Garland at today's Justice Department commemoration of the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision. On Thursday, President Biden will be hosting a meeting at the White House with the plaintiffs from that case and their families. On Friday, the actual 70th anniversary date, he'll be giving a speech at the NAACP. Axios has an article that reads, racial segregation in schools across the country has increased dramatically over the last 3 decades, according to 2 new reports and an Axios review of federal data. Decades after Brown and the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the U.S. has moved toward policies that increase the isolation of Black and Latino students by race and poverty. The resegregation of America's public schools coincides with the rise of charter schools and school choice options, and as civil rights groups have turned away from desegregation battles. That was from Axios. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word. You'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.